Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. Hi there. So I'm going to try something a little bit different in this episode of Feeling Beings Who Think. I want to share some thoughts with you, which in a way is a conversation. I know I'm the one doing all the talking, but I actually believe, and my own experience of taking in podcasts, not to mention preaching and sermons and those areas of my life, podcasts prompt an internal conversation, which is a big point of why I'm doing this. So I hope this episode prompts some internal discussion for you. I want to tell you about an online discussion group I attended a few weeks ago. It was a gathering of Daring Way facilitators in my region of the country. One of the cool things about being a certified Daring Way facilitator is that at least once a year, and sometimes more, the organization encourages us and helps us find ways to gather, for like continuing ed and ongoing learning, and also, just being together and supporting each other, which is great because, hey, isn't it great when you get together with people who care about the same things you care about? So it's invigorating time. Anyway, this particular gathering was focused on one of Brené Brown's books that doesn't get as much attention. I am sure it was a New York Times bestseller because they all seem to be. But this book, Braving the Wilderness, is not one that is typically referenced or you hear people referring to when they know her work. And I'm not sure why, because it is, it's equal to all her books, in my opinion, and digs into a really important topic that certainly connects with understanding the power of vulnerability. And that topic is belonging. What is true belonging? And if part or if all of the power of vulnerability comes from understanding that when you and I allow ourselves to be seen, when we reckon with the fears and the shame that allowing someone or a group of someone's into seeing us in that way, when we reckon with what comes up when we experience risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure, well, all of that comes up, I think, when we are paying attention to our feelings of belonging and wondering if I should change something about myself in order to belong. I mean, how often do we do that? How often do you and I change who we are, change what's important to us, deprioritize our own needs in order to meet the needs or in order to fulfill someone else's needs in different contexts and situations? How often does belonging and the desire for belonging actually lead me to do things that are more about fitting in, which, as Brené Brown says, fitting in is when you do change who you are to be part of a group. Well, as someone who so fully believes that my feelings and thinking about those feelings, reflecting on how those feelings are influencing my thoughts and my behaviors, I think this question of true belonging and coming to understand what that means for me and how that impacts how I move in the world, I think that is one of the most challenging and important aspects of something commonly referred to these days as adulting. Now, you may remember in a previous episode, a conversation I had with Erin Weber Johnson, who, by the way, is coming back because there are some things I want to keep discussing with her. But one of the things that I do remember we connected over in that conversation was the challenges of parenting, right? If you're a parent, it's hard. It is hard to be a parent. It is hard to take care of other human beings at various ages and stages. And what's hard on top of that is that you don't have to stop taking care of yourself at the same time. And I think as a parent, you recognize how you're modeling that. How I take care of myself is something I'm teaching my daughter implicitly all the time. So I think I shared the humorous story with Erin about this tea towel I have that just made me laugh. And I think about it often. Who knew that the hardest part of being an adult was figuring out what to make for dinner every single night? Because that really encapsulates for me just this ongoing responsibility of taking care of myself. And I think that connects a lot with belonging. So let me get back to this discussion group. So here we are, this group of Daring Way facilitators. Now, most of the people in this group were social workers, therapists, psychologists working with clients individually or with an organization. A couple people in this group also were coaches in various capacities, but usually working within leadership and organizational development in companies, for-profits, nonprofits, also working alongside the DEI work. We're the point person in an organization that's dealing with training and the responsibility of diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of that kind of stuff, which is very different from my day job or one of my key professional identifiers, which is being a priest. And yes, as you may imagine, I often feel somewhat awkward and that I do not belong when I come into these spaces of people engaged in a more, secular way of what I think is also healing work. And so it's always a little bit vulnerable for me to name what it is that I do when I am surrounded with these groups of people. And at the same time, I think it provides a window onto what it is we're discussing that's connected with spirituality, which I think comes up in all types of work that we do. So just to let you know, I'm keenly aware of when I feel out of place and slightly vulnerable in certain groups. So we were discussing belonging in this group, and I need to tell you what Brené Brown's definition is of belonging. And please note the connection with spirituality, which I want to circle back to. So this is what she says. True belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your more authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Okay, let that sink in for a minute. And there are actually two words in her definition that I believe really connect with faith. First, the idea that belonging is a spiritual practice. It's something we know innately, and it's also something we come to know and strengthen and cultivate and circle back to when we've lost our way, when we are spiraling with trying to fit in, and change ourselves to meet other people's needs, or change ourselves to be who we think we are supposed to be in someone else's eyes. My gosh, in a way, the word repent is to turn back, to come back to a sense of authentic you-ness in God. So that idea that belonging is a spiritual practice is, I think, relevant and important to me. And the second word that connects with faith for me is sacred. She says that in true belonging, we find sacredness. So you and I experience this when we are both a part of something And in being a part of something, we have the courage to stand alone in the wilderness, she says. And my friends, this is a key component of life in God that I certainly have come to understand in the context of the Christian tradition, in the context of being a part of something, a part of a faith community, a part of a body of Christ, a part of a communion of saints, etc., a part of the human family, and simultaneously knowing I am a unique, beloved child of God with my own saltiness, with my own light to share. And there are times when I'm called to be both a part of something, and then when choosing to, do something that requires me leaning into my own courage and sense of values, to stand alone and to stand apart, or to stand in solidarity with others who feel alone and set apart for reasons that are, marginalizing and even dehumanizing. So certainly the birth, life, death, resurrection of Jesus, to me, the whole story is a story of that. And the power of vulnerability, the birthplace of courage and joy, forgiveness, mercy, the power is that all of that is what allows somebody who can do both of these, being with and being alone. Both of them are life-giving and generative and for ultimately the common good. So suffice to say then that this definition of true belonging, I think, connects readily with a deep understanding of our faith and spiritual practice. And that's why I find it so connected and important to connect with the work of taking care of ourselves and the work of adulting. Recently, I heard somebody reference a Christian medieval teacher mystic of another time. I believe it was Meister Eckhart, who said, "You and I want to live a meaningful life. Yet, what is the meaning? When we say, I want to live a meaningful life, I want to be an adult who lives a meaningful life. Well, what is the life you want to live?" And I'll connect that to some wisdom that I more recently shared with you through my friend, Mark Collins, who in the last episode and conversation we had, he ended and we concluded that conversation where he dropped this wisdom bomb of, each and every one of us is spending our life trying to answer a question. And to me, that is a huge part of why I'm engaged in spiritual practices and engaged in intentional conversations. And in this podcast, it is growing alongside that question of what is meaningful in my life. Because whatever it is, for me, for you, I think that every time we come to an answer as to what it is that's meaningful, there's going to be another question, right? That's why powerful questions are so powerful. It's like that, oft-quoted poet Rilke, when he says, it's about living the questions. That's what's important. That's the meaningful life. So in this discussion group, we were given this question, and this is what I'm really circling to. The question, I think, has a lot to do with the season that we are about to enter in. And that's a lot of the conversations I've been having in different spaces and places with people, because it is a very stressful season. A lot of feelings come up in this season that I think are worth thinking about. So much so that, I'll even share a quick sidebar on that, which is, oftentimes when I think about one of the gifts of being a priest, it's going to be funny, I think, when you do what I do for a living, you can't go home during the holidays. You have a job to do, sorry, I can't come home for Thanksgiving. Sorry, I can't host Thanksgiving. I really I need to be at work for Thanksgiving. There's worship to lead, sometimes even an actual Thanksgiving service. So that's where my priority is. Christmas? can't host Christmas, can't come home at Christmas. I've got worship. I've got a bunch of services to do. And I think you and I, in different respects, know what a balm the responsibility of work can sometimes be when we need some escape or we need a reason to not deal with all the feelings and work that home life can bring. Okay? Right. Okay. So the question of belonging that was posed to my group of Daring Way facilitators was this: how do you support your clients who don't feel like they belong to their own families? Now, just before I tell you my response to that question, take a moment. When I asked it, what's the family that popped into your mind? Is it the family you see each and every day, your kids or your partner, your spouse, you with your friends, just your immediate family in this context? Or do you also think about your family of origin, particularly in the idea of the holidays and which family you are going to be spending your time with? I think that becoming an adult, learning to take care of ourselves so that we might authentically take care of others, a lot of that connects with not being influenced by the guilt we often feel around what we should be doing for our families. So I need to say that before I tell you how I responded to this question. And by the way, my interpretation of family, especially in the context of this question, how do you support your clients who feel like they don't belong to their own families? My response had to do with a family of origin situation. And here's what I said. If I was working with a client as a coach or in a pastoral counseling sort of conversation, I would remind them that in point of fact, I don't think you and I are supposed to belong to our families of origin. I think you and I, we are born into our families, and then you and I are supposed to leave, right? We don't just leave the house to start our own families, but we also leave ways of being that kept us from belonging to ourselves. The ways of being that kept us from feeling our feelings, the ways of being that kept us from trusting in what we knew to be true about ourselves or the experiences we were living through. That's a huge part of becoming an adult. When I left my family, I took with me the tools, the beliefs, the behaviors that I had learned. That's what I was equipped with when I went into the world. All those experiences and how they shaped me, most of which are not explicitly taught. They're implicitly taken in from the ways in which the system of my family of origin operated. And if you've listened to the conversations on my podcast, then perhaps you too have noticed this theme, right? Almost every single one of my guests has talked at some point, reluctantly or otherwise, about the feelings of not belonging in their family or experiencing something at some point that made them realize the tools they were given, the beliefs, the ways in which they were taught to handle life experiences, they just stopped working. The toolkit wasn't enough. It did not equip them fully for going into the world and being seen and showing up and living authentically, which typically leads to a period of emotional, spiritual, psychological growth and awareness, because that's the whole part of becoming an adult. And one of the things that's hard that my guests have talked about, and I certainly resonate with, are some of the feelings that come along with that awareness, the guilt, the shame even, the resentment, born of these feelings of responsibility we have towards all the shoulds that the family represents. And, that's a whole nother piece of baggage to unpack. I didn't want to unpack it. I just wanted to bring it up in this context because I think it's really important. And I want to say just one other thing, because for some of us, these holidays are filled with either an overt or sort of just, nebulous faith-based tradition around this season, having to do with gifts and gratitude and a lot of things we are supposed to feel. But I have to tell you in a very real faith-based way, and I hope this doesn't put you off because I still get nervous about talking about Jesus on this podcast. But I have to tell you, this guy Jesus, this human being who I remind myself and others every single week, shared our human nature and whose whole life is the power of vulnerability lived out, as far as I'm concerned. This guy, Jesus, he says this. He says this in his teachings. He's like, do you think I came to bring peace to families? Do you think that what I'm saying and doing is going to mean you all just get along and everybody is really nice to each other? No. Quite the opposite. He said his teachings and his life, they're like a sword that will divide families and divide these relationships between mother and daughter and father and son, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't think that he's just talking about my teachings are going to divide families because of a adherence or belief in some sort of institutionalized system like a church. It's not about some people want to go to church and some people don't. I mean, come on, give me a break. The Son of God came for a lot bigger things than just an institutionalized church. I'll lean a little bit into my presiding bishop, Michael Curry, who reminds us often, Christianity started as the way. It was a movement. It was not a building and an institution. So I think what Jesus is talking about when he's saying this stuff is going to bring division in family relationships is that as you adult, as you spiritually grow, as you open your eyes, as you realize the importance of letting your light shine to be the child of God that you were created to be, if you're going to be the salt of the earth, if you're going to experience the sacredness of true belonging that allows you to know and be your authentic self with others and apart from others, then of course, there are going to be times when you do not belong to your family in a way that compels you to let go of who you are and what you need to take care of yourself and not to sacrifice your needs to take care of other people, especially in a way that's going to breed guilt, resentment, anger, frustration, etc., etc. I think the sacrificial love, certainly that Jesus modeled, in my opinion, comes only because he takes care of himself so fully, so aware of his belovedness in God. That is what compels, propels, has him sacrifice everything to truly care for others. Do you see why I think thinking about this feeling, this belonging, this sense of belonging in our authentic self is important at this time, before the onslaught of the holidays? Okay, all right, I'm closing now. This is it. This is all I want to talk for. Everybody I've spoken to on this podcast, they have shared some experience of living through this. That's part of what resonates with me in their stories and becoming who they are. I certainly find this wisdom in Brené Brown. I find it in the Christian faith tradition and other wisdom traditions. I mean, my gosh, read Pema Chodron, When Things Fall Apart. There's a very similar sense, of this authentic self when we fall apart and discover it again. And certainly adulting requires some awareness of when we fall apart and taking care of ourselves holding on to that responsibility, I just think is something worthy of being emphasized and being encouraged, because I think it's a heavy lift. So I am going to leave you with just one other quote on belonging, and I'm reading this from her most recent book, Brené Brown's most recent book, Atlas of the Heart. Here goes. Because we can feel belonging only if we have the courage to share our most authentic selves with people, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Our sense of belonging, our trust in who we are in front of other people, no matter who those people are, strangers, people we work with, our parents, our kids, our sense of belonging, our trust in who we are in front of them can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. And that is why I think it's so important to learn how to get better at taking care of myself, at asking for what I need. That's how I get better at holding myself accountable before I try and hold other people accountable. It's what gives me permission and certainly courage to take care of myself at the holidays, which is, my friends, I think a vital responsibility this time of year and all times, and really important in whatever way you care about your own growth in your faith and in your spiritual life. In whatever way you care, again, like it's in the letter to Ephesians, I think, where Paul writes that we see with the eyes of our heart enlightened. I just think it's really important in connecting with that. So, my friends, thanks for listening to this. I wanted to share something this week, and this is what I'm doing. And next week, there'll be another conversation. Thank you for listening and supporting and giving me feedback on this. It is really appreciated. And that's it. All right. Take care. Bye.